people say, oh, electric vehicles are only for rich people, Jigar. It's like more expensive than an internal combustion engine car. You don't understand how used cars work and how everybody buys a used car, all that stuff. I totally get it. Don't get me wrong. But I think what people don't understand is today, it's 50% less per mile to operate an electric vehicle than it is an internal combustion engine car. 50% cheaper per mile.
The climate conversation has never been more divided. As disruptors in this space, we're hungry to find solutions to the challenges our environment faces. Welcome to the Climate Rebels podcast. My name is Joel Caesar. I'm joined by Owen Barrett and Chris Pomerleau. We are experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. We celebrate those who take action against the climate crisis and are striving to make the world a cleaner place. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to the Climate Rebel podcast. Joining me as always is the real estate oracle of Omaha, Chris Pomerleau, the self-proclaimed Adam Newman of Green Building, Owen Barrett, of course, myself, the world's greatest climate podcast host, Joel Caesar. Today's guest was very special, Jigar Shah, the director of the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office. We're very fortunate to have breaking news. He had a major announcement on the podcast. I learned a lot. I think one of my biggest reflections was the virtual power plant example and how the financing, the economics of what we usually spend money on and to create more carbon producing power plants that most of the time are not generating electricity we use, and instead trying to pay individuals to not use that energy, and what a change that could mean for average Americans. What do you guys think?
$400 billion of dry powder for clean tech. He should be every clean tech entrepreneur's best friend.
Yeah, I'm pretty succinct with what I took away too. It's time to shit or get off the pot because all the technology is there. Nobody's using it. So it's time to roll.
All right, great stuff. But before we get into all that, let's dive into a segment we're calling Did You Know? So we love highlighting the innovative and positive steps being taken towards a more sustainable planet. Did you know that the world's first ever net zero shoe has been developed? Shoe company Allbirds has announced that the world's first ever net zero shoe. So I don't know if you guys have done your homework on it. I've read up a bit on it. I think it's really cool, but I also think I'm interested to hear Owen's take because this term net zero might be a little complex with how they're justifying their shoes' carbon neutrality.
I did do my homework. I think Allbirds is guilty of something we're probably all guilty of, which is not making their messaging clear. I mean, I read the press release. I dug into what they're doing on the website. I've spent a decade in this industry, and I still kind of have a hard time understanding how they're claiming net zero. So I think it's awesome, but I think we in the industry as a whole need to do a better job really simplifying the messaging and how we're backing up the claims.
Yeah, I was reading about it and trying to poke holes. I mean, it's farming where they're raising cattle and lamb and sheep, and I'm thinking, how the hell are they calling this regenerative and carbon neutral? Now, I know there's good farming practices you can do with livestock, even heavy carbon intensive livestock, but I will say there was some cool stuff. You know, they said carbon negative sugarcane, the carbon negative bioplastic eyelets. They're made from microorganisms that convert methane. That's the same element that comes from sheep burps. They're talking about packaging. So there's a lot of good stuff here, of course, that we want to celebrate. But yeah, I worry that if you get into the nuances like, well, it's not actually net zero, it's producing some carbon emissions, and I'm sure at some point there's some offsets happening. Again, complex. We're going to root for you, Allbirds. We appreciate what you're doing, but let's get Allbirds on the podcast to talk through it.
That's a great idea. I like it.
Love that.
Now let's jump into our conversation with Jigar Shah. Jigar Shah is the director of the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office. He was most recently co-founder and president at Generate Capital, where he focused on helping entrepreneurs accelerate decarbonization solutions. Prior to that, he founded SunEdison, a company that pioneered pay-as-you-save solar financing. He served as the founding CEO of the Carbon War Room, a global nonprofit founded by Sir Richard Branson and Virgin Unite to help entrepreneurs address climate change. He's a well-rounded serial entrepreneur, expert, and innovator, and we're thrilled he's joining us today. Please welcome Jigar Shah to the Climate Rebels podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jigar, we like to start every show with the same question. How are you a climate rebel?
Well, I mean, I am known for bucking the trend at every turn. So whether it was believing that solar power could be a $1 trillion sector in 2003, or being a huge fan of renewable natural gas, or green hydrogen back, in the day, or like I'm always trying to figure out what angle is being underexplored. So it always seems to piss somebody off, but I feel like that's the right way to go.
It's good.
I feel like you're not making an impact if you're not pissing someone off.
No, it's true. Right. Well, these days I'm doing a ton of work on nuclear, right? So that's making me a lot of friends these days.
Well, we love pissing people off too, but before we get to that, we got breaking news here on the Climate Rebels podcast. You, Jigar, have a big announcement you'd like to share. We're excited to hear, so let's have it.
Yeah, so we are announcing a $3 billion loan commitment against $3.3 billion worth of debt to help Sonova, help more people in Puerto Rico as well as low FICO score customers around the country. And so, it's a huge deal because there's just so much misinformation that is used by S&P, Moody's, and Kroll to evaluate these loans. And so our guarantee helps to break through the noise and really help move away from, old data and focus on the actual data in front of them. Like, for instance, most of the portfolios limit Puerto Rican content to 3%, even though it's the best repayers in the country. They're just like, we're anti-Puerto Rico, so we're limiting it to 3%. So this will allow for up to 20% Puerto Rico content. Folks who are below 680 FICO score pay back their energy loans at much higher repayment rates than healthcare receivables and credit card receivables. But the rating agencies still use healthcare and credit card receivables because that's easier for them. And so we're able to more confidently provide that guarantee. And so as not just solar plus storage, but also heat pumps and other stuff that people are financing through these, solar financing providers become, something that all Americans need to take advantage of, not just wealthier Americans, then we just got to get this stuff right. And then the last thing I'd say is that we've layered on this virtual power plant piece of it. So as you know, almost everything you install now as an appliance in your house has an app associated with it. So whether it's your thermostat or your EV charger or your battery or your water heater, you can control it with an app on your phone. Once you can control it with an app on your phone, you now have the ability for the utility to use it in a way that, reduces costs for everybody and they can pay you for it. So we want to make sure that people get access to those payments and aren't denied those payments because people didn't think about it.
So Chris, what I heard is you're finally going to be able to get solar on your house.
Yeah. That's great.
We're going to make all those past indiscretions you had,
Jigar, I want to thank you for giving me that $3 billion. It's appreciated. I'll put good use to it, I promise.
I was going to say, sadly, there's not an app on my phone that gets Chris to execute our decarbonization plans in real estate faster, but we're working on it.
We'll get there.
That's a great service you're providing. I think it's going to be huge. So that's a great announcement.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's one of those things where people are signing these contracts already in about 47 states. So it's not like it's limited to just California or some of the other big states or places like New Jersey, New York, Florida. But you're seeing a ton of people, going and signing these contracts in Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, et cetera. And so you're starting to see people really nationwide moving this way. And largely it's because there's a huge independent streak in our country, right? There's a lot of people who want to generate their own electricity. We're only at 4% of all rooftops in the United States with solar on them. Australia is at 30%.
Wow. I didn't know it was that big of a difference.
So we got a long ways to go, right? And we need to make sure that when we take the rest of that distance, that we're actually making sure we're being inclusive and not leaving people out.
Well, it's so true. I think crossing party lines, it's such a popular mindset to create your own energy, control your own destiny, not be at the will of the utilities and the various other entities that are related to our energy. So again, we're here to celebrate and promote your work. But Jigar, we dove right in. Maybe let's take a step back. For those people who don't know you, what are you doing right now at the DOE, and explain a little bit about the office?
Yeah, so the Loan Programs Office was established in 2005. And the core idea behind it is that DOE, the Department of Energy, has been amazing at innovation. Almost anything and everything that you hold dear in the energy space is something that was invented by the national labs and the folks at DOE. And then for whatever reason, we allowed all of it to leave the United States of America to go to other continents for commercialization, right? So whether it was like technologies that went to Japan, they went to China, they went to Canada, they went to Germany, the UK, like we just didn't want to commercialize stuff here. And so they finally were, like, hell, we need to like actually commercialize this stuff here. We paid for all this R&D. We should have American workers manufacturing it here and deploying it here. And so, after a slow start, there was a whole bunch of loans given out from 2009 to 2011. So that's when we did the loan to Tesla. We did the first 500 megawatt solar facilities in the United States, wind facilities, geothermal, transmission. And so we basically did a whole bunch of this stuff back in that 2009, 2011 timeframe. We then were dormant for the better part of 10 years. And so when the secretary came in with the president, she made one of her top priorities unlocking the resources of this office. And that's when I joined. When I joined, we had about $44 billion worth of unused loan authority. And we had about 30 billion or so loans that we made already. Today, because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've increased the amount of our loan authority in my office from 44 billion to about 160 billion in those three core categories, and then another $250 billion program called the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, which is designed to help old coal plants, old natural gas plants, old pipelines make the transition to something useful and the energy transition right. Like turn a coal plant into a nuclear plant, turn an old pipeline from a natural gas pipeline to, transporting CO2 or ammonia or hydrogen, doing cool stuff with old infrastructure that, is already disturbed. It's already got that stuff. So we've got upwards of $400 billion of dry powder now to put to work.
If we see a Republican president after the next election, should we be worried that dry powder is going to sit on the sidelines? Or are you confident you guys will keep doing what you're doing?
You never know. I have operated this office in a way that's pretty nonpartisan, right? We are equally excited about nuclear power, carbon sequestration and storage, geothermal, hydro, EV charging, critical minerals, everything else. So, I'd say that we have 130 or so active applications today. I think it was up to 135. And they were stretched across every region in the United States, including Puerto Rico. And I think we even have active conversations in American Samoa. And so, you're in this interesting place where everybody wants access to these funds, right? And so it's hard as a politician, regardless of your party, to have 3 or 4 companies in your district saying, hey, I need that financing because I went to the local bank and they just have no interest in lifting a finger to help these technologies. They don't need to do this weirder stuff to meet their goals. And so they don't want to be first or second or third for that matter. They want to be 10th, right? And so we need, this loan programs office. And so, you beating them up isn't helpful. And so as a result, I think that we should be able to keep this office nonpartisan, but you just never know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You gotta love Owen diving right into the hard-hitting political question.
Well,
here.
I was told that these were going to be softball questions. So.
He went off script there. We actually talk about trying to not be political.
It's not
here.
a political question. It's like you guys have so much momentum behind the LPO office right now.
Yeah.
For all of that to end in 2 years would be, it'd be terrible.
I really think it'd be quite shocking to me if it ended in 2 years.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't know the answer to the question. So but I can suspect that I think we've been running things in a way that, I think is attracting excitement from everybody.
Sounds more pro-America than it does pro-climate action.
Yeah.
Which I think is the language we need to be speaking.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. Just to finish up that last thought, I would just say that, so it's roughly $400 billion of dry powder. And, ultimately, I think the average loan size in our office today is around 900 million. And so, that means probably something on the order of 400 projects to use up that capacity. We are seeing some really big loans coming in. So folks who are asking for, 5 billion, 8 billion, so it could be a smaller number, but it's probably 400 loans.
Can I ask one more question, Joel, or are you going to yell at me?
As long as it's not about the 24 elections.
So Jigar, we buy real estate and decarbonize it. So we're no stranger to big loans. We're not taking on $1 billion loans yet, but 20, 30 million is what we usually stick to. Are these loans recourse to the people taking them out? Are they non-recourse? How does it work in the event the business doesn't work out like the founders think it will?
Yeah. So it depends on the type of company. So for loans that are associated with deals like the ones you're doing, it's going to be a lot more non-recourse, right? Just because it's more project finance.
Yep.
For manufacturing loans, those are generally more recourse because people recognize that it's hard to do a manufacturing loan non-recourse.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Well, Jigar, you've been alluding to here a few times. You said VPPs, virtual power plants. Maybe just for the audience here, you can elaborate a little bit on what it is, why it's so important, and why it's such a focus of yours.
Yeah. So I think the story starts with air conditioning in the late 70s, early 80s. Most people didn't have air conditioning before then, and then everyone got it in the 1980s. And the way that our grid operates is the homeowner can do whatever they want, and the grid's got to respond to whatever the homeowner wants. So when everyone added air conditioning, you can imagine it was a huge increase in the overall load of the home. And we just built bigger pipes and built more natural gas peaker plants, right? So we built 500 gigawatts of natural gas peaker plants to meet that need, right? And so if we're not careful, that's exactly how we're going to respond to electric vehicles, right? But that raises electricity rates a lot, right? Probably something on the order of 5 to 10% a year every year, right? Now, if instead, the fact that you can control your electric vehicle charger with an app on your phone, right? So anyone who has an electric vehicle knows that you can turn your car on and off in terms of whether it's charging or discharging from an app on your phone. So that allows you to give someone else permission to do that. And if you give them permission to do that, what they'll do in exchange for you is give you a price to charge your car that's half what it would normally cost you. Because for most people, you're plugging in at the end of the workday, and then you're not unplugging it until the morning. Even though your car probably charges in 2 hours, it's plugged in for 11. And so it doesn't really matter to you which 2 hours of that 11 your car's charging. But if you actually allow someone else to queue it up for you, then that actually reduces rates for everybody. So that's basically what a virtual power plant is you allow people to flex demand with the same level of dexterity that before this time, we only allowed supply to flex. We never touched demand. We only touched supply. Now we're going to start flexing demand at the same rate that we flex supply, and it'll be in the background. So things like EV chargers, backup batteries that people have in their homes, water heaters. No one really cares when your water heater turns on. It could be right after you shower or right before you shower. And then in some limited cases like thermostats, plus or minus 1 degree.
And this influx or this massive increase in electrical demand that you're anticipating, you mentioned EVs, but that would also be building and heat pumps being brought on.
Oh yeah, I mean, the whole electrify everything movement is part of this. And what you're finding is that in general, the utility is constantly saying that we have to plan for the worst case scenario. Because of that, they went from about $30 billion a year of annual investment in sort of 2000 to $200 billion of investment last year. And that goes to everyone paying higher rates. So the question becomes like, could you get paid for demand flexibility? I'll give you an example. So there's a company called Octopus Energy in Texas, right? They charge roughly 15 cents a kilowatt hour for power if you just want a fixed price, you don't want to mess around and all that stuff. For every appliance that you give them that they can flex for you, they give you a 5% discount up to 4 appliances. So you get 20% off your bill if you give them the ability to flex 4 appliances. And at any given time, you can opt out. You can say, this is uncomfortable. I don't really want to do this. I'm going to opt out. But 20% is no joke on your electricity bill. Most people can barely get a 1% savings on their electricity bill. So I think it's a big deal. And frankly, people are a lot more flexible than they think. Like in general, like I said, they don't really care if their backup battery in their house is at 80% state of charge or at 95% state of charge. They don't want it to be at 50, but they don't really care whether it's 80 or 95.
Jigar, how many across, and I don't know if you know this, but across the US, how many utility companies have a program like Octopus Energy? And is it my understanding that FERC 2222 is going to accelerate that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very little, very few right now, right? So you can imagine that most utility companies are like, this is such a cool idea, and we've been piloting it for 40 years, but this is a big change for us. We don't like change. We want to move really slowly. And so you've got pilots, lots of places that are growing into something big, like Duke Energy has a big program that they're rolling out. Florida Power and Light has a big one that they're rolling out. All of the states in the PJM, regional transmission operator, so that's Illinois all the way to Virginia, have big programs rolling out. The New York ISO, you just got a big program launched in the Northeast. California obviously always has something going on. And so, everyone's got something they've been piloting for a little while. Some of them have gotten bigger rollouts. But honestly, some of this is actually like a bit of a stare down. So some of the utilities are saying, can we really just get away with just doing the things the old way? Because that would make everyone's life easier. But it's not easy to do because one, you're raising rates 5 to 10% a year. And you can imagine 1 in 6 households in this country right now are behind on their electricity bill. 1 in 6, right? With an average balance of like $600 they owe the utility. Wow. It's outrageous, right? We can't keep doing this.
Jigar, I heard you on another podcast recently. I don't have the facts straight, so I'm going to let you explain this. But it was well to hear that what we as a country, utilities spend something $10 billion a year to keep peaker plants up and running so that we have power at the worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
And this will unlock the way to take that $10 billion and give it to ratepayers, give it to average Americans.
Well, this is exactly, we right now, roughly 10% of everything we pay every year to the electric company goes to what we call balancing. So it's not a kilowatt hour. It's not generation. It's the art of making sure supply and demand are always equal to each other. So you have good frequency and voltage and all that stuff. And most people do it with spinning reserve, right? With natural gas spinning reserve. Increasingly, people are doing it with Tesla Megapacks, right? Which is great. But you can also do it by flexing people's demand. And that 20% that I just talked about, that discount in the Activist Energy thing, comes from that 10%. And so that's about 20 billion a year, of which half you could say should be able to be shifted to pay homeowners instead. And the fact that this is not the top priority when 1 in 6 households are behind an electricity bill, you got to wonder how much people hate poor people. It's like, why wouldn't you even try to figure this out? Like, I get inertia, but I mean, when people like our neighbors are suffering as much as they are, I mean, you got to rise to the occasion.
Jigar, you said we weren't going to get political. You got to stop saying things like that now.
I mean,
but sometimes truths are truths. I do have a question. How can we in our position help and actually partake in this entire virtual thing? Because we have 2 different routes that we take here at Raven. So I can tell you that the conglomerate that's on this podcast right now, obviously we're buying pre-existing apartments and we're adding in solar and we're trying to decarbonize that way. We're also looking at some additional opportunities to actually new build apartments. And so how can we take advantage of these opportunities as kind of sponsors on these investments? Where's this virtual fit into our world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, frankly, I like the folks who are taking existing and providing it a refresh. Because I think that when you think about these facilities that we have, in general, you're serving, middle market, customers or lower middle market customers, right? I mean, most of the luxury customers want to go to new builds with, whatever the new amenities are. So I think that's an interesting piece. But the other piece of it is there's lots of different financing opportunities available, right? So you've got the $20 or $30 million in senior debt that you're putting onto the property to buy the property, right? And then maybe do some of the refreshes. But you also have rebates that are coming from the California Energy Commission or from, other parties, utilities, et cetera. And one of the problems that you have is that the people who reside in these facilities are generally not going to bother with all of this minutia. Right? It's just not their thing, right? Like, I mean, you live in a place, you don't want to become a PhD in virtual power plants. And so the question really becomes like, how do you get services that you want, right? How do you get EV charging? How do you make sure that you get lower electricity bills that are more dependable, all those things? And what we're talking about here is how you do that. And so part of this is getting people that are in your position to actually do this homework for their residents. Yeah. Right? And say, look, I mean, if we're going to future-proof this place, like, yeah, I get it. Like only 20% of the spots right now need to be electric in California. But we all know that by 2030, the vast majority of those spots are going to be electric, even if it's for plug-in hybrid vehicles, right? Even if it's not a full electric, people who just want to do a convenience charge for 35 miles and save 90% of, their gasoline consumption are going to go that way. How do you make sure you future proof these projects to make sure that like you've got 110 and 240 connections in almost every, parking spot, right? How do you figure out how you do all that stuff? And so part of the way you do that is by getting paid for this virtual power plant service, because you're going to have some additional costs associated with putting a lot of that infrastructure in. And a lot of it you're going to charge the customer for, right? You're going to say, look, like I can't just charge you the electricity rate. I'm going to have to charge you an extra $10 a month for the infrastructure. Fine. But if virtual power plants are allowed to be done, right? Remember, for a lot of these folks, they're going to be plugged in all night in that spot. And it doesn't matter to them if they charge at noon or 1 in the morning or whatever it is. And what the utility will say is like, look, if the load at the building is flexible, we'll give you a much cheaper rate. That's getting paid.
How quickly do you think the shift to VPPs is going to happen in terms of utilities kind of integrating rates or tariffs that support it?
I think in California, it'll be in the next year and a half.
What about nationwide?
Right. You saw that with the NEM 3.0 decision, right? Like where they're saying that you get the full credit if you use the power in the building. And if you export it to the grid, then you only get paid 7 cents.
Yeah.
Right. So by definition, they're telling everybody to add a battery and make it VPP enabled. Otherwise, like you're not going to get full credit, and you need to internally shift the power so that you're self-consuming that power. And then, but separately, California is already curtailing a terawatt hour plus of solar and wind that is produced generally in the spring and the fall, like right now, because there's not enough load for all this extra power coming in. Well, one of the ways to deal with that is to shift load, right? And just say, well, actually, if you're going to charge, like let's charge when the power is practically free, because we were going to curtail it. Mm-hmm. We were going to tell the solar project to shut down because you were producing too much power, right? That's free power, basically, if you let it flow. And so I think that you're already starting to see that. And then Texas is already doing it as well. They've got an 80 megawatt pilot running right now. But as soon as that pilot's successful, they're going to 10x it, because they're saying we have practically free power in the middle of the night with all this excess wind. And Texas will surpass California in terms of solar installations, probably starting the middle of this year, right? And so they're going to have excess power production in the middle of the day too.
It's almost like the state of Texas was given a violent shove into thinking about energy at all times.
Well, they do have, Houston is the center of gravity for all energy. So,
well, I think it's great that they're kind of, just another way they can surpass California in some way. I'm sure they're going to love to brag about that too. So.
Well, I think that healthy competition is a good
thing. Agreed, no doubt.
And so I think it's great. But I think, but the PJM is definitely moving this direction too. So, you've got companies looking to give every single household in the PJM states free thermostats, right? Everybody in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and then down to Virginia. They're saying, we'll just give you free thermostats because it's like $50 for us to give you a free smart thermostat. And we'll get paid 40% returns to put that in there while giving you a discount on your electricity bill. And so you're starting to see people like really think big in terms of how they're going to use this virtual power plant. And then just to give you one more answer to your question, the Tesla Megapacks and batteries will basically, for Powerwalls, will be about, all of them combined, not just Tesla, but other people, 100 gigawatt hours will be added to the grid cumulative by 2030. In 2030 alone, we plan to ship 800 gigawatt hours in the cars that we ship that year.
Wow.
Right. So if you don't figure out how to make those batteries in the car part of the grid, you're screwing yourself.
Yeah.
Right? You're not taking full advantage of the stuff that people have already paid for. And you don't have to pull power out of the battery, right? Which I know scares people, whatever else. You can just turn charging on and off for most of this, right? Now, even the Ford F-150 Lightning, though, does want to pull power out of the battery. Ford is bragging about the fact that they've got a partnership with Sunrun, where if you hook it up properly, you could back up your entire house with the battery from your F-150 Lightning.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right? And so that's a Super Bowl ad they did.
Yeah.
Jigar, what's the message? So someone's listening and saying, I'm sold, virtual power plant. I'm in. I'm a single family homeowner in Pennsylvania. Is the message go talk to your congressman about lobbying the utility? Is it buy EVs? Is it smart thermostats? How does the average person say, I'm sold, I want to take action?
So I think there's a couple of messages. One is, if you're a homeowner, I think it's to go call your mayor and your city council and say, we want to take advantage of this. Why aren't you helping us more? Like, we should be leading in our county and in our state. Like, we shouldn't be fast followers. We should be leading on this thing, because the first people in get paid the most, right? That's just always how it works. But I think for developers like you guys, which is where I'm more interested on this conversation, I just think that when they make these decisions to buy a property and then, put 20 or $30 million into a loan and then upgrade the property, that upgrade has to be relevant for 20 years. And I don't think they're thinking about that, right? People say, oh, electric vehicles are only for rich people, Jigar. It's like more expensive than an internal combustion engine car. You don't understand how used cars work and how everybody buys a used car, all that stuff. I totally get it. Don't get me wrong. But I think that what people don't understand is today, it's 50% less per mile to operate an electric vehicle than it is an internal combustion engine car. 50% cheaper per mile.
Soundbite. And please say that 5 more times.
And everyone knows it. Like everyone senses it. I have a lot of friends who have one internal combustion car and one electric car, and they used to put, let's say, 10,000 miles a year on each car. Like, after 2 years, they're putting 15,000 miles a year on the electric vehicle and only 5,000 on the internal combustion engine vehicle.
We did exactly that.
Yeah.
We have an EV and a gas van, and we've shifted all the miles to the EV.
Because subconsciously that it's cheaper to run that car.
Yeah, 100%.
So you're even if it's smaller than your internal combustion engine car, when you're going to the restaurant 5 miles away, you're like, I'm just going to take this electric vehicle. And so all those vehicle miles traveled are going that way. And so when people are developing this real estate, they got to think about how this place becomes relevant. And it's a problem, right? So my in-laws bought a place that's brand new here in one of these neighborhoods called The Crown up in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And they didn't think about this. So there are no plugs anywhere in the whole place, right? They put in 4 plugs because they wanted to get the lead points, and they sold those spots to someone else, right? Yeah. So now, even if you're an electric car, you can't park there to get charged because these guys haven't thought about it for 1 second, right? Now, the board of the condo association has to figure out all these people buying electric vehicles, and they have to go to the local Target to charge, because their parking garage doesn't have any way to plug in. And they're saying, well, if you're going to do it, you have to spend $4,000 of your own money to hook up your particular parking spot.
Yeah,
I was like,
we have a property manager in South Dakota that stays ahead of kind of new amenity trends within sort of A-class, B-class properties. And they said that a couple of years ago, it was a golf simulator. And then it was a movie theater that you could rent out with your buddies. And now it's EV chargers. And whenever multifamily owners install them, the number one feedback that they get is you didn't install nearly enough.
Yeah. And all you have to do is actually just in the ceiling, just put a bunch of conduit at 110, even if you don't want to make it 240.
Yeah.
And it costs almost nothing. But if you don't do it, then the drop downs are super expensive to do if you got to pay for the entire run for your electrical.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make any sense that people didn't think about it, right? So that's the big thing I want to do, is to make sure that people are thinking about it and future-proofing these decisions. Because otherwise, the people who have to live there end up hating you the whole time, because they're like, what the hell? You just gave me a faulty piece of real estate.
Yeah.
Let's say you have 200 parking spots, right? And you you make 80 of them electric. And I know you'd like to have all 200 of them electric, but just deal with my hypothetical. Let's say those 80 aren't being used for another 10 years. Let's say you're only using 60 or 50 or 40. Have you seen studies on what that costs the apartment owner for all of that to be run to these spots that aren't being used? Is there a downfall there? Is there a...
Yeah. No, so first of all, From the perspective of the CapEx, it's almost nothing. It's like $100,000, right? Particularly before you pour everything and, cement everything in. But the second thing is that like, I'm not actually saying you got to put in the chargers. I'm
ready.
saying
Okay.
it's got to be infrastructure ready.
Yep.
Right? Like, it's one thing for someone to have to spend $475 on Amazon for like a little charger and then just plug in, right? But if the plug's not there,
right,
and they got to run the plug 2,000 feet from the breakers, well, then that's super expensive.
right.
And they hate you for that.
Yeah.
But if it's already pre-wired and then they have to pay $475 for the charger, I mean, that's nothing. I mean, some of them actually just get free chargers with their car for $110, so they can just plug in. Like, all I'm saying is you just got to put the outlets there
and be ready. You're just
right.
You're asking people in our position just to be ready. This is where it's going.
That's right. And then if you want to rev people down and say, look, we're only putting in 800 amps to do all this stuff. So when there's only 10 spaces, everyone gets 80 amps. But as we go to like 200 spaces, people only get 4 amps. You can do that too. But also the VPP helps there because at any given time, all 200 cars don't have to charge. It's probably only like 50 that have to charge or 40. So then they get 4x or 5x the amps, which is more than enough. So like, that's the thing about this whole thing is that all of these inventions were done 10 years ago or so, but like people just aren't future-proofing their hardware. And so then someone later has to replace it all.
You're preaching to the choir. That's one of Owen's biggest complaints is that it's all there. We just got to step in and actually use it.
Yeah,
got to do it.
That's exactly right.
Well, that's a good segue to where I wanted to go next. Jigar, while all of us in the climate action community are grateful you are where you are, I think you left a hole in the clean tech venture capital field when you left Generate. So I'd love to go back in time a little bit. I'll just tell a quick story. I think Owen and I started talking about this idea 5 years ago. We should buy apartment buildings and decarbonize them ourselves. We're tired of trying to convince these archaic real estate owners like Chris to do the right thing. So we just got to go buy the buildings.
And they were successful in convincing me, by the way.
But Jigar, it's again, I speak to how you're vocal and you're present, you're on social media, and we saw like, here's a guy talking about deploy, and we have the technology, and we don't need a new fancy clean tech thing that's going to save the world. Because we were screaming the same thing. Like, we have a business model right now that can decarbonize buildings. We just need people to give us money to do it. So I guess maybe if you can, tell us a little bit about your time at Generate and elaborate on the mindset you had about we should just deploy what we have and how that still serves your mindset today.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of pieces there. One is that, when we created this business model at SunEdison around pay as you save infrastructure as a service, it was sort of weird. Other folks thought, maybe it was illegal. We got through it all. And then it became $1 trillion scale. So when you're at $1 trillion scale, a lot of people make money off of it. They become excited about it. So now you've got a bunch of other people copying that model, whether it's, batteries as a service or renewable natural gas digesters as a service or EV charging as a service, or even weekly rentals of EVs to Lyft and Uber drivers, right? There's all sorts of people who are moving to add a service, right? And the problem was that you had a bank who was like, no, we'll do solar and, maybe we'll do community solar. A little weird for us, but maybe we'll do that. But they're not going to do batteries as a service. They're certainly not going to do EV chargers as a service. When they looked at like electric vehicles, they don't mind funding rental car companies and their fleets using internal combustion engine cars. But they'd be damned if they were going to fund EVs because they just didn't understand the collateral curve and what they were going to be left with if they got stuck with those cars and how to sell them, all that stuff. So a lot of what we did at Generate was say, we'll spend the 100 hours of time to actually understand what the hell you're doing and whether it actually pays itself back and it makes sense. And that's not that different than what I do now at the loan programs office. We get a similar number of people coming in and we're saying, all right, like we get it. Like most people don't want to hear your whole pitch. They're like, oh, that's a technology that we haven't done yet. I'd have to write 12 investment memos for my investment committee. I'm too lazy to do that. I don't want to do that. So stop right there. We're not going to do this deal. And so we're in charge of listening because we have a public policy mandate. And so we have to listen to all these things and we have to use the 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts we have on our platform to opine on these things. And it's one of those things where America, has no lack of people who are just looking at problems in front of them and going, you know what? I think we might be able to solve this. We might be able to do something just a little bit different. But what happens is that every step of the way, the financial partners that they have to interact with say, do I want to get stuck with this if it doesn't finish, if it doesn't go smoothly? Do I actually have the wherewithal to step in? And for a lot of people, they're like, I don't. So I'm not going to I'm not even going to charge them extra interest to do this because it's just that problematic for me. And so that's what we were doing to Generate, was really saying, let's find a place to do that and to have that conversation. The other thing I would say that we did at Generate was look at smaller check sizes. There were a lot of people in the infrastructure space that said, even if we did do big deals, we're just not going to get out of bed for less than $400 million.
You ever hear that?
And so
show us your pipeline.
Right. And so figuring out how to get someone to put in the first 20 to 50 million was a huge problem. And it's one that they also worked on there. And we struggle with that too at the loan programs office. Our smallest loan sizes that we've ever done was 42 million, but most of them come in at 100 million and above. And we are trying to figure out how we go smaller.
Can I ask a question sort of related to small check sizes, but slightly different?
Yeah.
So we, like Joel mentioned, we did talk to Generate a little bit about our business model. We ran into some issues of sort of the percentage of money or funds that would be putting towards renewable energy versus the underlying real estate. It was skewed more heavily towards real estate, obviously. So it wasn't a great fit. And then we had some interesting conversations with the LPO. And we thought it could be a great way to have some takeout debt. So if we figure out the way to acquire real estate, decarbonize it, convert it to net zero, then use LPO to take out. But we were running into issues with having to have a credit rating of the asset, which was really hard for a small company with multiple assets. Are you guys looking at that as sort of an alternative solution to smaller projects?
Yeah, so we should talk through it. I don't think it's actually that hard. In general, we don't ask people to get a real credit rating. It's like sort of a credit evaluation. Fitch and Moody's probably does more of it than most of the other rating agencies do for us. And what we want them to do is actually produce 60 pages of analysis. We don't actually even care what the credit rating is. It's really more about what are they saying the issues are. And then we shadow credit rate every one of our deals. And our average shadow credit rating for a new deal is sort of B plus, right? Or double B minus. So we're not sitting in investment grade paper. I mean, the latest deal that we did 2 or 3 months ago was triple C.
Oh wow. Okay.
Plus. So we don't really care where the credit rating comes out. Well, and they usually charge, I think, roughly $100,000 or something to do this. But they basically come in and actually just give us 60 pages of here are all the things that we think could go wrong that we think need to be part of the evaluation of determining what the credit, shadow credit rating would be. So, I mean, if you're not getting, good responses from the credit rating agencies, we can definitely talk about that. But in general, I'd say that the goal of the loan programs office is not to solve your problem, although that is how we do our work. The goal of it is to figure out a way to help that asset class get across the bridge to bankability through your project. And so that's why some of these other tasks are a part of it. It's because it helps us evaluate your credit, but it also helps us to start to train the credit rating agencies on getting their mind around these asset classes.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
You gotta love, you come on the Climate Rebels podcast and Owen is pitching you to give us better debt.
I mean, every day. I can't walk down the street.
I just hear 400 billion.
A lot of news, a lot of press, a lot of stories about climate can be negative, can be doomsdayer, but we like to talk about hope and optimism and celebrate disruptors like yourself. So can you maybe share something that gives you hope for the future?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're constantly hearing from people that we're going to run out of lithium or run out of cobalt or run out of whatever the critical mineral is that we need for this revolution, right? This energy transition. But, what I'm super excited about is how many new chemistries are coming out every day that don't need it, right? Whether it's zinc bromide chemistries or sodium-based chemistries for cars or lithium iron phosphate that doesn't use nickel, manganese or cobalt. Like in general, I have to say that every time I turn around, there's more interesting chemistries that are actually made of something that is plentiful, easy to find, really cheap, right? And so I am not at all worried about us getting the critical minerals that we need for this transition. I think we all have to work hard at it. Don't get me wrong. So I'm not taking the foot off the gas, but I do think that in general, it's overblown. I think people don't really recognize first, just how many critical minerals we have in the crust of the earth. But second of all, just how much innovation, how much diversification we're getting away from lithium ion batteries.
It's good news.
That's a really key message that we need to hear more of. It's well said, Jigar. So thank you. Well, guys, I'm going to have to wrap us up. Jigar, it's been a pleasure. I'm sure I speak for Owen and Chris. We're honored to have you here, and we'll be rooting for you.
Yeah, thanks,
Well, thank
Jigar.
you. I'm going to need it, actually. So keep doing that.
Well, Jigar, is there anything you want to plug? How our audience can find you? What's the best way to follow along?
Well, the one thing I want to plug is that we're hiring another 100 people. So ultimately, we've got unprecedented amount of demand for what we're doing. And so we need more people. So, if folks want to do a tour of duty here at the Loan Programs Office for a couple of years, we'd love to have you. It's super important. And frankly, I think it finally makes your kids proud of you. It's one of those things where they're like, I actually understand what you do now. So that's been my experience with my 7-year-old. He's like, Daddy, you work on climate change every day. That's pretty exciting. I think that's great. So yeah, if you ever think about doing a tour of duty, we'd love for you to choose the Loan Programs Office.
Well, we will spread the word. Yeah. Thank you, Jigar. And thank you everyone for joining. You can find us on most of the social media platforms at Join Raven. That's Join, and Raven is with a Y, RAYVEN. You can find this podcast and more great content at joinraven.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to fight the climate crisis?